My best friend stole $2,000 from me and tried to kick me out of my own apartment to pay for her wedding, but she didn't realize I'd already found the secret notebook detailing her exact plan. Rewind to my senior year at State University, a mid-sized campus in the Midwest where everyone knew everyone's business. I was 21, psychology major, working part-time at the campus bookstore to afford my half of a decent two-bedroom apartment off Greek Row. My roommate Brooke had been my best friend since freshman orientation. We'd bonded over terrible reality shows and shared dreams of graduate school. Brooke was pre-med, the kind of person who color-coded her study schedules and never missed a deadline. We split everything 50-50 and trusted each other completely. She had my Netflix password, I had hers. She knew my coffee order, I knew her class schedule. We were basically sisters. The tiny detail that should have been a red flag. Brooke started dating Nick in September, this 25-year-old philosophy major who worked sporadically at coffee shops around town. Something about him felt off from day one, but I couldn't put my finger on what exactly bothered me about their relationship. At first, I brushed it off as normal roommate adjustment stuff. Nick started spending more time at our place, which was fine. He seemed nice enough, always offering to help with dishes, bringing coffee for Brooke when she was stressed about organic chemistry. I figured I was just being territorial about my space. But then Nick lost his job at the campus coffee shop in October. According to him, he quit because the manager was exploiting student workers. According to Brooke, who heard it from her friend who also worked there, Nick got fired for showing up late 3 times in 1 week. Either way, he was suddenly unemployed and couldn't afford his studio apartment anymore. Brooke came to me in tears, explaining that Nick was about to be homeless. Could he crash on our couch for just 2 weeks while he found something new? He'd contribute $400 a month toward rent and utilities, which would actually save both of us money. I said yes because Brooke was my best friend, and she seemed genuinely worried about him. Plus, $400 would drop my rent from $600 to $400, giving me an extra $200 monthly that I desperately needed for textbooks and groceries. Nick moved in with 2 duffel bags and a guitar. For the first week, he was the perfect house guest. He made coffee every morning, kept the living room clean, and spent hours on his laptop supposedly job hunting. Brooke was happier than I'd seen her in months. Then 2 weeks became 4 weeks. Nick's job search grew increasingly philosophical. He'd research companies online, then eliminate them for various ethical reasons. The local bookstore exploited independent authors. The coffee chains were destroying local culture. The nonprofit organizations were just another form of capitalism. Meanwhile, his promised rent contribution became sporadic. He paid the full $400 the first month, but November's payment was only $250 in crumpled bills. Brooke made excuses. Nick was being selective about employment because he wanted meaningful work. He'd pay everything back once he found the right opportunity. I should be more understanding about how difficult the job market was for someone with principles. That's when Nick started rearranging our apartment. It began small, moving the coffee maker to a different counter, reorganizing the spice rack alphabetically instead of by frequency of use. When I complained, he'd explain how his system was actually more logical and efficient. Then he started mixing his belongings with ours. His books appeared on our shelves between my psychology textbooks and Brooke's medical references. His clothes got mixed into the laundry rotation. His guitar claimed permanent residence in the corner where we used to keep our small dining table. The worst part was how Brooke began treating me like an outsider in my own home. She and Nick would cook elaborate dinners together, never asking if I wanted to join. When I tried to use the kitchen while they were cooking, Nick would make passive-aggressive comments about the limited counter space. They'd watch movies together every night, having intense conversations about philosophy and politics that made me feel stupid for enjoying regular TV shows. When I'd try to participate, Nick would politely explain why my opinions were surface level or problematic. I started spending more time in my room or at the library. Our apartment, which had been my safe haven for 3 years, began feeling hostile. Then a second thing happened that made me realize this wasn't just normal roommate tension. In November, I got accepted to graduate school with a full fellowship. Huge news that I'd been hoping for since sophomore year. When I burst through our door with the acceptance letter, Brooke barely looked up from where she was cuddled with Nick on the couch. "That's great," she said flatly. "Congratulations." No excitement, no jumping up and down, no celebratory dinner plans. My biggest academic achievement was treated like I'd announced I was picking up milk from the store. Nick nodded politely and went back to watching whatever documentary they had on. Brooke made a few more half-hearted comments about being proud of me, then returned to their conversation about sustainable living or whatever. I stood there holding my acceptance letter, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. These were supposed to be the people who cared most about my success. Instead, they acted like my good news was interrupting their evening. Maybe I was overreacting. That's what I told myself for the next few weeks. Maybe Brooke was just distracted by her relationship. Maybe I was being too sensitive about not being included in every conversation. When I mentioned feeling left out, Brooke got defensive. Nick was going through a difficult time with unemployment and family issues. I should be more supportive instead of making everything about myself. Besides, they weren't excluding me. I was choosing to isolate myself in my room instead of hanging out with them. My other friends agreed with Brooke when I brought up my concerns. Hannah from my psychology class said roommate dynamics always got weird when someone started dating seriously. It would probably balance out once Nick found work and got his own place. My mom told me to be patient. Relationships require adjustment periods, and I should try to be understanding about Brooke's need to focus on her boyfriend. The situation was temporary, and preserving my friendship with Brooke was more important than winning some territorial dispute about apartment dynamics. Everyone said it wasn't a big deal, but my living situation was becoming unbearable. I felt like a stranger in my own home, walking on eggshells to avoid disrupting the happy couple's routines. The breaking point came in December when Brooke and Nick announced they were getting engaged. They'd been dating for 3 months, but apparently Nick had proposed during finals week while I was holed up in the library studying for my abnormal psychology exam. Brooke showed me her ring, a simple silver band that Nick had bought at a local vintage shop. She was glowing with happiness, talking about their plans for a small wedding the following summer, right after graduation. I congratulated them and tried to seem excited, but something felt rushed about the whole thing. 3 months seemed awfully fast to get engaged, especially when Nick couldn't hold down a job and was living on our couch. When I gently suggested they might want to wait until Nick's employment situation was more stable, Brooke got angry. I was being unsupportive and judgmental. True love didn't operate on practical timelines. Nick was the best thing that had ever happened to her, and she'd expected her best friend to be more enthusiastic about her happiness. I apologized apologized and tried to be more positive about their engagement, but privately I was concerned. Brooke was usually cautious about major decisions. Getting engaged to someone she barely knew, who was currently unemployed and living in our apartment, seemed completely out of character. Christmas break provided temporary relief. Brooke went home to visit her parents in Michigan, and Nick went to Oregon to meet his family. I had the apartment to myself for 3 weeks, which felt like pure luxury after months of feeling like an unwelcome guest. I caught up on sleep, cooked meals without working around elaborate culinary projects, and watched whatever I wanted on TV without getting lectures about media consumption. For the first time since October, I felt relaxed in my own home. But when they returned in January, things got significantly worse. Our old furniture had been replaced during my absence. The couch Brooke and I had bought together sophomore year was gone, replaced by an expensive leather sectional. Our small TV was swapped for a huge flat screen mounted on the wall. Even our coffee table and bookshelf had been switched out for different pieces. Brooke explained that Nick's uncle had been moving to Florida and needed to get rid of furniture. They'd sold our old pieces and used the money for groceries and household supplies. Wasn't it great how much more comfortable the new setup was? I was furious. Those were my belongings too, and I hadn't consented to selling them. Brooke pointed out that we'd bought everything together, so technically it belonged to both of us. But making unilateral decisions about our shared possessions while I was gone felt like a massive violation. When I asked where the money from the sales had gone, Brooke got vague. They'd spent it on various things: food, gas, utilities. She didn't have receipts, but it had all gone toward household expenses that benefited everyone. Nick had also moved into Brooke's bedroom permanently. His air mattress was gone, replaced by his belongings spread throughout the common areas like he owned the place. He was no longer a temporary guest. He was a permanent resident with equal claim to the apartment. Spring semester started with Nick fully entrenched as our unofficial third roommate. His dirty dishes filled the sink. His laundry was always in the machines. His video games and books dominated the living room. When I wanted to watch TV or use the kitchen, I had to work around his schedule and preferences. Nick also escalated his unsolicited advice about my lifestyle. He criticized my diet, study habits, and social choices. When I ate leftover pizza, he'd lecture me about nutrition and food waste. When I spent evenings in my room studying, he'd suggest I was becoming antisocial and needed more human interaction. Brooke agreed with all his assessments. They presented themselves as concerned friends trying to help me become a better person, but their version of help felt like constant judgment and control. Meanwhile, Nick still wasn't working. His selective job search had evolved into elaborate excuses for why every available position was beneath his ethical standards. Brooke picked up extra shifts at her campus job to support both of them, coming home exhausted while Nick spent his days reading philosophy and playing guitar. When I suggested Nick should take any job while continuing to look for something more meaningful, Brooke defended his choosiness. He was being thoughtful about his career instead of just settling for whatever was available. I should admire his integrity instead of pressuring him to compromise his values for money. I also started noticing that my personal belongings were disappearing. My expensive shampoo ran out twice as fast as usual. Food I'd bought for myself vanished from the refrigerator before I could eat it. My specialty coffee was replaced with generic brands, and my favorite coffee mug was always dirty or missing. When I confronted Brooke about this, she seemed surprised that I minded. We were all living together, so sharing resources made sense. She didn't think I'd care about them using my shampoo or eating my leftovers occasionally, but I did care. I was on a tight budget, and replacing stolen groceries and toiletries was straining my finances. I told Brooke firmly that they needed to ask before using my stuff, and she promised to be more respectful of my belongings. Nothing changed. If anything, my things disappeared faster. My good hair products were replaced with cheap drugstore versions. My carefully planned leftovers were eaten by someone else, leaving me scrambling for dinner after long days of work and classes. Then I started noticing strange charges on my credit card statement. Small amounts: $8 at Starbucks, $15 at Target, $22 at restaurants I'd never been to. The charges always appeared on days when I was in class or at work, times when I definitely wasn't making purchases. I called my credit card company assuming it was fraud. The representative told me the transactions were all local, within a few miles of my address. Did I live with anyone who might have access to my card information? The question made me uncomfortable. Brooke had seen me use my credit card hundreds of times. She probably knew my PIN from watching me enter it at stores and ATMs. She'd even borrowed my card a few times freshman year when her account was overdrawn, always paying me back immediately. But Brooke would never steal from me. We were best friends. We trusted each other completely. I told the representative no one else had access to my cards and requested replacements. Over the next week, I filled out fraud dispute forms and waited for new cards to arrive, trying not to think about my growing suspicions. All I wanted was to finish my senior year and graduate with my friendship intact. Somehow, it had become a daily struggle just to feel comfortable in my own apartment. Receipt number 1 was small but hard to ignore. I started paying closer attention to my credit card statements and noticed a pattern. The mysterious charges only appeared on days when I was gone for extended periods, during my Tuesday-Thursday lab blocks, when I worked evening shifts at the bookstore, or when I was studying late at the library. The amounts were always under $25, small enough that I might not notice immediately but large enough to add up over time. Coffee shops, convenience stores, gas stations, fast food places, all within walking distance of our apartment. I started keeping my credit cards in my wallet and my wallet in my bedroom, locked in my desk drawer whenever I left the apartment. The mysterious charges stopped appearing. That was when I knew for certain someone in my apartment had been using my financial information without permission. There were only 2 possibilities, and I couldn't bring myself to believe Brooke would steal from me. Receipt number 2 made denial harder. I was cleaning our living room one afternoon while Brooke and Nick were both out when I found a notebook wedged between the couch cushions. It was small and black, filled with Nick's handwriting. I opened it planning to set it aside for him, but the first page made my blood run cold. It contained a detailed sketch of our apartment layout, drawn to scale with measurements and notes. But it wasn't our current arrangement. The furniture was positioned differently, and my bedroom was labeled as storage office space. instead of a bedroom. The next page showed a budget breakdown calculating apartment expenses for 2 people instead of 3. Rent, utilities, groceries, internet, everything split between Nick and Brooke with no mention of my contributions. I flipped through more pages with growing horror. The notebook contained what appeared to be a timeline of Nick's integration into our living situation, broken down into phases with specific goals and tactics for each stage. Phase 1 involved establishing goodwill and contributing financially to gain trust. Phase 2 focused on gradually claiming shared spaces and introducing personal belongings into common areas. Phase 3 aimed to reduce my comfort in the apartment and establish couple dominance over shared resources. The final phase was labeled roommate removal and included strategies for making my life uncomfortable enough that I'd choose to move out voluntarily. But the page that made me physically sick contained my personal financial information, my full name, credit card number, expiration date, and security code. Below that was a detailed log of unauthorized transactions. The list went on for pages, documenting months of theft that totaled nearly $800. Every fraudulent charge I'd disputed was there, along with many others I hadn't noticed. At the bottom of that page, Nick had written wedding fund $1,847 and security deposit recovery $1,200. They were planning to steal my portion of our security deposit to help pay for their wedding. Not only had they been using my credit cards for months, but they intended to take my deposit money when our lease ended in May. I photographed every page with my phone, then carefully put the notebook back exactly where I'd found it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone steady. Receipt number 3 ended the debate about what was really happening. I needed to understand the full scope of their plan, so I started paying closer attention to their conversations and behaviors. Over the next week, I documented everything. I wrote down timestamps when they discussed money or apartment arrangements. I saved text messages Brooke sent about being stressed about finances. I took photos of Nick's belongings that had migrated into spaces that were supposed to be mine. The evidence painted a clear picture of systematic manipulation, designed to push me out of my own apartment while stealing money to fund their lifestyle and wedding plans. But the final proof came from an unexpected source. Brooke's phone was charging on the kitchen counter one morning when she was in the shower. A text notification popped up from Nick. "Did you transfer the money from her account? We need to make the venue deposit by Friday." Brooke's response came a few minutes later. "Got $200 yesterday. We'll try for more tomorrow when she's at work." They were actively coordinating theft from my accounts. Brooke wasn't an unwilling accomplice. She was Nick's partner in stealing from me. That's when the blowback started. Even though I hadn't confronted anyone yet, Nick seemed to sense I was becoming suspicious. He started making comments about how I seemed paranoid and antisocial lately. When I asked questions about household expenses or wondered aloud about my missing belongings, he'd suggest I was creating drama over nothing. Brooke began echoing his assessments. I was becoming difficult to live with, constantly complaining about small issues and making everyone walk on eggshells. Maybe I was stressed about graduation and taking it out on my roommates unfairly. When I tried to talk to Brooke privately about my concerns, she got defensive and angry. Nick was doing his best in a difficult situation. I was being unsupportive and judgmental about their relationship. If I had problems with their behavior, I should address it directly instead of making passive-aggressive comments. But every time I tried to address anything directly, they'd minimize my concerns or flip them back on me. Missing food was normal roommate stuff. Household expenses were complicated, and they were contributing in ways I didn't see. I was being oversensitive about sharing space with people who were trying to build a life together. My other friends took their side when I tried to explain what was happening. Hannah from my psych classes said roommate conflicts were normal senior year when everyone was stressed about graduation. I should try to be more flexible since Brooke and Nick were engaged and planning a future together. My lab partner suggested I was probably just jealous that Brooke had found love while I was still single. Wedding planning was stressful, and I should cut them some slack if they seemed distracted or demanding lately. Even my academic advisor dismissed my concerns when I mentioned that my living situation was affecting my ability to study at home. She suggested I spend more time on campus or in the library if my apartment was too distracting. People I trusted took the other side without really listening to what I was telling them. I started to doubt my own perceptions and wonder if I was overreacting to normal relationship dynamics. But the financial evidence was undeniable, and their behavior was escalating rather than improving. Annoying turned expensive when my credit monitoring service sent an alert about suspicious activity on one of my accounts. Someone had attempted to open a store credit card using my information, but the application was denied because I already had too many recent inquiries. I hadn't applied for any credit cards. Someone was using my personal information to try to access additional credit lines. I pulled my full credit report and found 2 inquiries I hadn't authorized, one for a department store card and another for a gas station credit account. Both applications had been submitted online using my home address and accurate personal information. The timing corresponded with days when I'd been at work or in classes while Brooke and Nick were home alone with access to my personal documents. I also discovered that my checking account balance was lower than expected. 3 ATM withdrawals had been made from the machine at our neighborhood grocery store, $40, $60, and $80, all on days when I was definitely not there. Someone had been using my debit card as well as my credit cards. The total amount stolen was approaching $2,000 over the past 4 months. Now it wasn't just my feelings being hurt or my living situation being uncomfortable, it was my financial security and credit rating being destroyed. Brooke and Nick weren't just making me unwelcome in my own apartment. They were actively stealing from me to fund their lifestyle and wedding plans. I had to do something before they did permanent damage to my finances or successfully forced me out of the apartment I'd been paying for all year. The situation was affecting my academic performance too. I couldn't concentrate on studying at home because I felt constantly on edge. I was spending money I didn't have to replace stolen food and toiletries. I was losing sleep worrying about what they might do next. My senior thesis advisor noticed my declining focus during our weekly meetings. My grades were slipping in my final semester classes because I couldn't properly prepare at home and was too distracted to focus during lectures. The people who were supposed to be supporting me through my final year of college were actively sabotaging my success while stealing money I needed for graduation expenses and post-graduation transition costs. And then I found the one thing I wasn't supposed to see that changed everything. I was homesick with food poisoning one afternoon when Brooke thought I was at work. She was on the phone in her bedroom, but her voice was loud enough that I could hear every word from from my room. The security deposit is $1,200, she was telling someone. If we can get her to move out before May, we keep her half plus our half. That's enough to cover the venue deposit and half the catering costs. There was a pause while she listened to whoever was on the other end. She's getting suspicious about the credit cards, so we need to be more careful about that. But Nick thinks we can make her uncomfortable enough that she'll want to leave on her own. Then it won't look like we forced her out. Another pause. I know it's not ideal, but we're desperate. The wedding is in July, and we still need $3,000 for the venue and catering. Her deposit money plus what we've already saved should be enough to make it work. Brooke was actively planning to steal my security deposit money while discussing strategies to force me out of the apartment. This wasn't just Nick manipulating Brooke. She was a willing participant in their scheme to defraud me. I recorded the rest of the conversation on my phone, capturing her detailed explanation of how they planned to claim damages to the apartment that would justify keeping my deposit money. They were going to document fake wear and tear, report made-up cleanliness issues, and claim I'd violated lease terms by having unauthorized guests or pets. The property management company rarely investigated deposit disputes, so they'd likely succeed in keeping money that rightfully belonged to me. After that, everything shifted in my mind. This wasn't just roommate drama or relationship jealousy. This was theft, fraud, and conspiracy to steal thousands of dollars from someone who trusted them completely. Brooke wasn't my best friend anymore. She was a criminal who was actively working to destroy my financial stability and living situation for her own benefit. I spent the next week documenting everything more systematically. I photographed Nick's notebook again, saved screenshots of my credit reports and bank statements, recorded conversations when they thought I couldn't hear them, and compiled a detailed timeline of their fraudulent activities. I also started looking for alternative housing options, though finding a place mid-semester with no security deposit money was nearly impossible on a student budget. But before I moved out and let them get away with everything, I needed to confront them with proof of what they'd been doing. I went in calmer than I felt, armed with printed copies of all my evidence and a detailed summary of their fraudulent activities. Brooke and Nick were cooking dinner together when I entered the kitchen carrying a manila folder full of documentation. They looked up as I set the folder on the counter and opened it to reveal bank statements, credit reports, and printed photos of Nick's notebook. "We need to talk," I said quietly. Brooke's face went white as she recognized the notebook pages. Nick tried to play it cool, but I could see panic in his eyes. I led with the simplest truth. "I know you've been using my credit cards to make unauthorized purchases. I know you're planning to steal my security deposit. I have documentation of everything." Nick immediately went on the attack, claiming I'd violated his privacy by going through his personal belongings. I was paranoid and delusional, making wild accusations based on misunderstandings and coincidences. Brooke tried a different approach, attempting to minimize the situation. They'd only borrowed small amounts of money, and they'd always intended to pay me back. The notebook was just Nick brainstorming worst-case scenarios, not an actual plan to hurt me, but I had too much evidence for them to explain away. I showed them printouts of my credit card statements with highlighted fraudulent charges. I displayed my credit report showing unauthorized inquiries. I played the recording of Brooke's phone conversation about keeping my security deposit. "This isn't borrowing," I said calmly. "This is theft. You've stolen nearly $2,000 from me over 4 months, and you're planning to steal another $1,200 when our lease ends." Brooke started crying, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration and anger at being caught. "You don't understand the pressure we're under," she sobbed. "Nick's family expects us to have a real wedding. My parents keep asking about our plans. We couldn't afford anything decent on our own, and we knew you'd never help us if we asked directly. So you decided to steal from me instead. We were going to pay you back eventually," Nick said defensively. "Once I get established in my career and we have steady income, we would have made sure you got every penny back. With what money? You haven't worked in 6 months. I've been selective about opportunities because I want to find something meaningful and sustainable. You've been living off stolen money while your fiancé works double shifts to support you." Brooke's tears intensified. "I can't believe you're going to destroy our lives over money. I thought you were my best friend." "Best friends don't steal from each other, Brooke. Best friends don't lie and manipulate and plan elaborate schemes to defraud people they claim to love. I gave them a choice. They could repay every dollar they'd stolen plus interest, move out of my apartment immediately, and agree to forfeit any claim to our security deposit, or I would file police reports for identity theft, credit card fraud, and conspiracy." Nick laughed. Actually laughed at what he called my ultimatum. I was bluffing because I'd never want to destroy Brooke's future over a few $100s. Brooke was pre-med with graduate school applications pending. Criminal charges would ruin her career prospects forever. "You care too much about other people to follow through on threats like this," he said confidently. "You'll complain and make us feel bad, but you won't actually do anything that would seriously hurt us." "Watch me," I replied, pulling out my phone to call the non-emergency police line. That's when Brooke finally broke down completely. She begged me not to call the police, promising they'd find a way to pay me back immediately. She'd take out student loans, Nick would get any job he could find, they'd sell the engagement ring if necessary. But it was too late for promises. They'd had months to come clean or change their behavior. Instead, they'd escalated their theft while making me feel crazy for noticing that something was wrong. I told them they had 24 hours to move out of my apartment. After that, I'd file reports for every crime they'd committed and let the legal system handle the consequences. Nick stormed out, claiming I'd regret destroying the lives of people who'd tried to help me become a better person. Brooke packed her belongings through tears, alternating between apologies and accusations that I was ruining her life over money that didn't really matter in the long run. By the next evening, they were gone. Brooke left her key on the kitchen counter along with a note saying she hoped I'd someday understand that they'd only taken the money because they were desperate, and they'd never intended to hurt me permanently. I found Nick's notebook under the couch cushions where he'd forgotten it in his rush to leave. I kept it as evidence in case they tried to dispute my version of events later. It didn't look like TV justice, but it felt like victory. My apartment was finally mine again, quiet and peaceful, without the constant tension of living with people who were actively plotting against me. I filed police reports anyway, despite them moving out voluntarily. Identity theft and credit card fraud are serious crimes that shouldn't go unpunished just because the perpetrators apologize when they get caught. Here's what actually changed. Brooke was arrested 3 days later at her parents' house in Michigan. Nick was picked up in Oregon where he'd fled after after leaving our apartment. They both ended up with criminal charges and restitution orders. Brooke's pre-med dreams died with her criminal record. Her graduate school applications were automatically rejected when background checks revealed pending felony charges. Nick spent 4 months in county jail before accepting a plea bargain that included restitution and 3 years of probation. I recovered most of the stolen money through insurance claims and restitution orders, though it took nearly a year to resolve all the financial damage they'd caused. More importantly, I learned to trust my instincts when something feels wrong, even when everyone else says I'm overreacting. I learned that some people will smile to your face while planning to destroy your life behind your back. I learned that real friends celebrate your successes instead of stealing from you to fund their own dreams. Now I live alone in a studio apartment near campus, where no one uses my shampoo without asking or eats my food while I'm at work. I graduated with honors and got accepted to graduate school with a full fellowship, using money I earned honestly instead of money I stole from people who trusted me. Brooke sent one final text from jail. I hope you're happy now that you've ruined everything we worked for. I deleted the message without responding, but if I had answered, I would have told her this. I didn't ruin anything. I just refused to let her keep destroying what's mine.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and drop your favorite part in the comments. See you in the next one.